Okay, guys, we're diving into 1.2 here. Remember, we talked yesterday about there were two types of variables. We had categorical variables, which have labels, and then we have quantitative variables, which are used for count or measuring. And so, what we're going to do today is look at how to display categorical data. And you have done these before, nothing more than some simple bar charts and pie charts. Okay, but we're going to go through, talk about how we go through and we create these bar graphs and these pie charts, and then you're going to have a small assignment to do just after that, which we'll go over as well. But if you look, there were 130 students that were asked about their movie preference, and you can see that the results were 32 preferred comedy, 46 preferred horror, 15 preferred drama, action was 27, and documentary was 10. So we had 130. So if we create a bar graph of the data first, what we'll have is we'll have our title. I always want to know, well, what's our graph represent? Well, for this one, that graph represents movie preference. And so then what we'll do is along the bottom, we'll label our subjects. And so we're going to let this one be a comedy, and I'm just going to put a C there. This one will be a horror, so I'm going to put a H. I got two preferences. Start with the letter D, drama and documentary, so I can go DR for drama, and then I can go A for action, and then I can go DO for documentary. So again, or you can write out the whole thing, that's fine. But we got our five categories there. Now, along the need to make sure we label what is down here. What does CH, DRA, and DO mean? Those are our movie types. So movie type. Along the vertical axis, what you have is that's going to be our frequency. Okay, and so we're going to use that bar graph to do our frequency. And what we have is, if you look, we go all the way up to a high of 46. I can't count by ones here, but what we can do is we can actually count by fours. Okay, and that's just so we don't have so many. So this line would be 4, and then this line would be 8, 12, and we're scaling it by 4 here. That's called a scale. 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, 44, and finally we'll stop at 48 because that's as much as we need. 48. Okay, and so all we have to do here is simply create the height of the bar. So if you look, comedy had 32, so comedy was 32. So above the C, what we'll do, we'll draw ourselves a bar all the way up to the height of 32, and then we'll finish it off just like that. Now if you want to shade it in, that's fine. We want to draw some squigglies. Take your time to highlight it, whatever you need to do. But all we're doing is we're representing the frequency of each movie type with representing the movie type with a bar graph. Horrors, they were at 46, so horror movies 46 preferred that. So I'm going to go halfway in between 44 and 48. That's 46. And then again, do the same process. Finish out your bars here. And if you want to shade it in a little bit, that's feel free. Drama. Drama had a total of 15 people that preferred it. So for drama, I'm going to come just below 16 here. And I'm going to finish this off as well, just like this. And then we highlight it. Action. Action actually had, I believe it was 27. Yep, 27. So I'm going to come just below 28. And that's going to be the action. And then we're going to do the same thing. Finish off our bar. If we'd like to shade it, that's great. Like so. And then finally, documentary, only 10. So that's going to be halfway between 8 and 12. So that's going to be here. So again, bar graph helps us represent categorical data, more specifically the frequency of categorical data. And then just remember that a couple things. Make sure you give the graph a title. Make sure you label both axes, and make sure we describe what's on each axis, and then from there scale it so that it's appropriate. Like I said, we had a high of 46 there, so I didn't want to count by ones, and even didn't want to count by twos, because then that's 23 different marks that you have right there. So there's your bar graph, which represents the frequency. Now if we want to represent the relative frequency, okay, usually we do that with a pie graph, okay, or a pie chart, which is this round thing just over here. Alright, and so the thing is, remember, for relative frequency, you take the count, the frequency of each individual, divide it by the total. Well, they told us at the very beginning that the total was 130, and so from there what we can do is to figure out the relative frequency for each one. First off, we would just say, okay, well, we need to do 32 divided by 130, and that equals 0.246. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave that as a decimal, just because we're going to figure out how much of the pie graph should it take up, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But 46 divided by 130 is going to be, that's 0.354. 15 divided by 130, that's going to be 0.115. 27 divided by 130, that's going to be 0.208. And then 10 divided by 130 is going to be 0.077. Okay, so now you have your relative frequency there, and I told you to keep it in terms of decimals, because what we're going to do to make this a proper graph, proper pie chart, we need to take the fact that a circle has 360 degrees and use this to figure out how big our central angle should be. And if you remember from geometry, the central angle is an angle whose vertex is at the center. And so what we'll do is, to get this column over here, you see it says relative central angle. What we'll do is we'll multiply each of these decimals by 360 degrees, because there's 360 degrees in a circle. Okay, and so to start it off, that would be 360 times 0.246. And when you do that, you get 88.56. And that's degrees. And so what we'll do is we'll go down this line here, relative central angle, and we will multiply each by 360. So Miss Mosher is going to pause it, give you a few minutes, go down and multiply those real quick, and then we'll continue on with our answers. So what you should have gotten after multiplying all those by 360 degrees, for horror it was 127.44 degrees, for drama it was 41.4 degrees, for action it comes out to be roughly 74.88 degrees, and then for documentary it comes out to be 27.72 degrees. And so what that tells us is, that tells us how big the section for each category should be. You see a lot of people when they do pie charts in elementary school and middle school, they'll just kind of guess at how big they should be, but we want to be more accurate and more precise with our graphs. So what we do now is we come up here to our pie chart, and we're going to do the best we can to figure out exactly how many degrees. Now we could go use a protractor and measure this thing out to be exactly right, okay, but for our sakes today and for time's sakes and the way I'm delivering this lesson, what we'll do is we'll eyeball it. So starting up there at 12 o'clock, what I'll do So I'll draw myself a line. And 360 degrees around that circle. If you think about a clock face, then at 3 o'clock over here, we've traveled 90 degrees. Okay, so the first category, comedy, it said would take up 88.56 degrees. So what will happen is this comedy is going to take up almost that full 90 degrees. So really, it's going to be about right here. So what happens is that comedy section is going to take up almost all of that. And what we do is we label it and we say comedy, and that comedy percentage was 0.246 or 24.6%. Okay, and that's coming from the relative frequency. But we're using central angles to figure out how big these parts should actually be. And so now, again, for the next one, for the horror, what you've got is, guys, is that it took up 127 degrees. Okay, so now remember, you've got about 2 degrees to work with here until you get to that last one. And then what happens is once you travel here, and I'm going to use a black dotted line to just reference for you. Once you've gotten to 6 o'clock down here, this right here means you've traveled almost about 92 degrees, roughly. Okay, so you've covered up 92 degrees, but remember, we have to get almost to 130. So 92 degrees, we got to almost get to 130. That's going to be an additional, let's see, 92 degrees and 130. That's going to be an additional 40 degrees. And so honestly, if you continue to break this up into quadrants, that's another 90-degree quadrant over here. I got to go almost halfway to about right here. And what that's going to do is, that's where my line is going to stop. So really, all this section right here that we just drew, that's going to be the section your horror movie takes over. Okay, and then again, if you look, it was 0.345 as a relative frequency. We would say 35.4%. So you see what I'm putting in the actual graph here is I'm actually putting in the relative frequency. I'm using the central angle. Okay, using the central angle there, and then from there I'm putting in the relative frequency. So to clean this up, I'm going to remove, whoop, didn't mean to do that. Let me draw that line back. Let me erase what I'm supposed to erase here. Okay, and let me change this a little bit. Let me get this smaller. There we go. So I'm going to clean this graph up a little bit here. So that's why we do it in pencil. Okay, so remember, we've covered everything so far. We've covered 88.56 with comedy. We've covered 127.44 with horror. What we have left in this quadrant right here, right there from here to here, is simply going to be, that's about, again, almost 50 degrees. So we have 50 degrees left. And if you look, the next one up is drama. Drama had a central angle of 41 degrees. So what's going to happen is we're going to use not quite all of it. So if I draw my new line, it's going to go somewhere right in here. And again, if we want to be real precise, we'd be using a protractor here. But that's going to be my drama. And again, make sure you put in the relative frequency there, which drama is 11.5%. And again, I'm getting those numbers from this column right here, the relative frequency column. I'm not putting in the angle measurement. I'm using the angle measurement to figure out how big the section should be. But then from there, I'm using the relative frequency to label my pie chart. All right, and then so from there, the next piece, remember, you got about 10 degrees you're working with from here to there. That's about 10 degrees left. So we got to cover 74.88, and so that's going to be 10. and then we need an additional 64. So that's going to be about 2/3 of the way through this graph, through this last quadrant here. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit. These black lines can go. Let me get rid of those for you. So we start to see how clean it can be. And then we can clean this up too. And so this section right here was our action section. So we want to say action, whoops. And again, we want to use the relative frequency, which was 20.8%. And then that final piece is our final one, that's documentary, which had a total of 7.7%. Just like that. Okay? So that's all you do. To make this right here is to simply, again, use the fact that a circle has 360 degrees. And what we want to do is multiply the 360 by the relative frequency in decimal form to figure out how big the central angle should be. And then from there, use that to figure out how big your section should be. And then from there, the last step, again, make sure you label it. So this was movie preference. And again, what we do is we use the pie chart when we're talking about relative frequency. We use the bar graph when we're talking about frequency. Okay? One more thing we can do is look at what's called a two-way frequency table. Okay? And so if you look down here, we got a two-way frequency table, and we're missing some numbers. Okay, but what we're looking at is we're looking at the comparison of males and females and the political party identification that they have. And if you look, we have males and females over here on the left-hand column, and then across the top, or left-hand rows, and then across the top we have each party identification: Democrat, Independent, Republican. You see there's some missing values here. So what we can do is this 574 and this 585 and this missing number here should all add up to equal 1483. Okay, should all add up to equal 1483. And so then also, what should happen is this 483, this blank spot here, and this 456 should all add up to equal 1499. Okay, and then you see we're missing the total number of Democrats. Well, all we have to do is add the 574 and the 483 to get those missing values. So real quick, we'll do that one. The 574 and the 483, that totals out to be 1057. So there were 1,057 Democrats. Okay, the independents, and again, you could also do the total divided by the females, or subtract the females to get that. But we're going to do 483 and 456. When we subtract that from 1499, we get 560. And let me double check that one, because I believe at some point before some of these numbers might have been off, because that doesn't add up. Let's see, 483 plus 456 is 939. 1499 minus 939 is 5. Okay, that one works out. Maybe it was this one up here. And again, to do the total number of females, I'm going to say 574 plus 585. That equals 1159. 1483 minus 1159 is 324. Okay, that's right. So that finishes out our table. All right, so let me erase some of these lines here, clean this up, get rid of that, get rid of that. So now you have a complete two-way table. Okay, and so what we can do again is we can do what's called a segmented bar chart. And we're actually going to do this segmented bar chart by using our percentages. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is because those numbers are huge. And so when you're trying to scale this, it's just going to be a messy bar graph. But remember, with percentages, they only go up to 100%. Okay, so we can scale that a little bit more consistently across the board here. Okay, so to do a segmented bar graph that shows the distribution of party identification by gender, okay, gender is going to be our independent variable. That's going to go along the x-axis. And then the party identification is going to be our dependent variable. Okay, but in order to do that, what we'll do is we'll create a relative chart to the total. So we're going to recreate this chart here. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll use the relative frequencies though. So this was Democrat, this was independent, and I'm just using the letters here for abbreviation for time's sake, and then this was Republican. Alright, now we'll say, okay, there were 574 female Democrats, and there was a total of 2,982 people total. That's 0.193 or 19.3%. So that tells us that 19.3% were female and Democrat. Do the same thing for female and independent. Take 585 and divide it by total 2982. When you do that, that's 0.196. So Ms. Mosher is going to pause this video again and let you finish making your total your chart. Just divide every number that you have from up top and divide it by the total 2,982, and then she'll play the results. So we come back here, the females and the Republicans, you had 324 over 2,982. You should have gotten 0.108. For the males, again, you had 483 Democratic males divided by the total. That should have given you 0.162. The males who were independent, that was 560 divided by the total. That's 0.188. And then finally, this one right here, 456 divided by the total, that's 0.153. So what we've done is we've converted all those numbers into relative frequencies. And when we do a segmented bar chart, what we're going to do is we're going to break it up. We're actually going to break this up. The male and the female will be our independent variables along the x-axis. But what we'll do here is we're going to change it and have basically two different graphs here. So these three will represent our female. These three over here will represent our male, and we'll do a bar graph for each political party. And so what we'll do is you'll see the highest percentage that we get up to is just below 20%. So what we're going to do is we're going to count by twos because we're converting to percents. And I'm going to scale this by twos here. This is going to be 10. This will be 12. This will be 14. This will be 16, 18, and 20. And then again, I'm going to make a note that this is the percent right here. Make that note that that's the percent. And so what we have here, if we're looking at females, we're looking at the females here. Females, the Democratic was 0.193 or 19.3%. So the Democrat female is going to be right here, and I'm going to give them one box. And I'm going to make a note in the bar that this represents the Democrats. The Republicans females, they turned out to be 0.196. So that's going to be just, I'm sorry, that's independent. 0.196. So that's going to be just a little higher here. And again, I'm going to make a note that that's independent with an I. And you can shade these in if you want, but I'm going to finish this thing off at the bottom here. So our segmented bar chart, our bars are actually going to touch for space-wise. And then the Republicans that were female dropped down to 10.8%, which is down somewhere right in here. And so I draw their bar, and I'm going to make a note with an R that that's the Republicans. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the male, Democrat, Independent, Republican. So the male was 16.2%, so I'm going to give it a little space, and I'm going to take this up. 16.2% is just above 16, so just right there. And then we're going to bring it back down. I'm going to make a note that that's the Democratic. Independent was 18.8. Okay, and that was the tallest one. So 18.8 is just above 18 here. Going to draw that out. There we go. Again, this is independent. So we're here. And then finally, the Republicans, they came out to be 15.3%, which is somewhere right in here. And we'll finish that bar out. And there you go. There's your segmented bar chart. Okay. And again, I need to give my graph a title. This was party identification or political party identification. And I'm going to label this down here gender, which everybody knows male and female is talking about gender. So again, when you're asked to do what we're asked there, a segmented bar graph, all right, it usually helps to make them into relative frequencies or percentages and then go from there. Now remember that movie types usually, that frequency tables are usually represented with bar graphs, and that relative frequency tables are represented with your pie charts. And remember to always multiply your relative frequency in decimal form by 360 degrees, because that's how many degrees are in a circle. And then from there, what you can do is use that to create the sections that are a little bit more accurate than what you used to do in elementary school.